would you say are some of the most commonly underestimated challenges that engineers or project managers might encounter when you're managing construction in these complex corridor projects?
People really underestimate just the sheer complexity of all the stakeholders and trying to coordinate those. They all have competing timelines. They have competing priorities. You have various utilities that are going to be out there that your project is not their top priority. They have other capital plans that they're trying to get out the door.
You're a civil engineer and you want to manage mega projects. Well, in today's episode, I have two gentlemen that do just that. Jared Hamilton is a licensed professional engineer, construction services group manager, and senior PM, and Jesse Singer is a licensed professional engineer, construction services department manager, both from Stanley Consultants. And they work on mega corridor projects. And what they're going to talk about today is what makes these types of projects challenging for those that manage them, and how can you really develop the skill sets that you need to be successful in these large projects that involve a lot of risk. They gave us some great knowledge and skills from the work that they've been doing. And I think if you're a civil engineer or a project manager and you work in the transportation or really any large projects, you're going to get a lot out of this one. Now, before we jump in, I do want to tell you about AEC PM Connect, an interactive experience where civil engineers can sharpen their project management and leadership skills through real-world sessions on AI and project management, earn value, and risk management. And here's the exciting part. At this event, we'll also be announcing the winners of the AEC PM Awards, recognizing professionals who lead with purpose and deliver measurable results. Just imagine someone from your firm being named AEC PM of the Year. That kind of recognition can boost your people, your culture, and your firm's reputation in a big way. Our next Connect event will take place on June 10th, 2026 at the Forest Gate Country Club in New Jersey. You can register now at aecpmconnect.com. Again, you can register at aecpmconnect.com. And if you'd like to nominate someone for the awards, head over to aecpmawards.com to download the nominations guide before the deadline of February 28th. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast, the industry's leading show for civil engineering professionals, ranked as the #1 civil engineering podcast by FeedSpot. Jared, Jesse, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast. Excited to have both of you guys on the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Excited to be here.
All right. So what I want to start with today is just maybe each of you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves and kind of what led you into your current roles at Stanley. Jesse, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I would love to. I've spent almost 20 years managing construction projects in Northern Illinois. My typical projects range from major interstate expressway reconstruction to residential street rehabilitation. We specialize in large corridor management projects, but we also do, any kind of bridge, roadway, utility, as well as water main, lift stations, traffic signal, and street lighting projects. I actually started out my career doing design, but quickly, when I learned of construction management, I quickly made that career shift and that change. I learned I enjoy working outside. I like working with the different type of people interesting people that you meet in construction. Clicking on a computer screen in a cubicle was not for me all day, but I like the variety of construction, so the fast-paced environment. So I like building something of value for clients, and I think it really plays to my strengths as a construction manager. Complex corridor projects require both effective communication and collaborative team building between clients, stakeholders, and contractors, so which we probably talk about more, so.
Awesome. Jared, tell us about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I started out in college, University of Missouri, and during college had a couple internships, one with MoDOT, the Missouri Department of Transportation, and another one with Kansas City Public Works. In both of those, I was exposed to construction and working outside on projects. And when I graduated, I got hired on by the Illinois Department of Transportation up in District 1, which is the Chicagoland area, and started my first year working in design. Back when we sat at drafting tables and used Mylar sheets and ink, that's when I started. and spent a year there, then transitioned over to the Bureau of Materials, where I was working outside on some large, huge scale projects. And that's where I kind of fell in love with working outside. After I started outside, I had some time at a desk and then decided, yeah, outside's where I want to be. So started out in materials and became an area supervisor, and immediately started working on the Dan Ryan reconstruction, which was $1 billion reconstruction program here in Chicago, managing the quality assurance for all the concrete and asphalt on that project. And then at the same time, we were doing the Kingery Borman reconstruction, which was a small $600 million project. So it kept me busy. That was my first taste of huge corridor reconstruction projects. And that's kind of where I fell in love with the fast pace and the excitement of doing large scale projects like that.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great to hear that you both have kind of that design and construction experience. I think that's really valuable. I know for me, I worked in design. I also started my career doing a lot of surveying in the field. And I just feel like, having the knowledge of both of those is really helpful when you try to put a project together, right? You just know stuff that you wouldn't know if you were doing one or the other. So I think that that's awesome. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But Jared, I'm going to start with you here. And I want to ask you, what would you say are some of the most commonly underestimated challenges that engineers or project managers might encounter when you're managing construction in these complex corridor projects?
Yeah, I would say people really underestimate just the sheer complexity of all the stakeholders and trying to coordinate those. They all have competing timelines. They have competing priorities. You have various utilities that are going to be out there that your project is not their top priority. They have other capital plans that they're trying to get out the door. You have railroads oftentimes and transit authorities in the bigger urban areas that have blackout periods where you can't do any work. More often than not, you can only work at night around those rail yards. You also have various property owners. You have various funding agencies. Many of these corridor projects have more than one funding agency that all have stakes in it. They all have priorities of what they want to get out of that project and timelines they want to get it done in. And at the same time, you have emergency services, you have MOT and the traveling public, and you have the contractor who is also a stakeholder in the whole thing. So trying to manage all of those different priorities and timelines is very time consuming, almost a full-time job in and of itself. Now you have that going on. At the same time, you have the maintenance of traffic where you're trying to push people through as quickly and safely as possible, and that's a given. But if there's any way that you can help the contractor by improving their productivity, coming up with ideas, maybe an extra entrance here or there, ways to give them more access and allow them to be more productive, at the end of the day, is going to shorten the timeline of that project and could also help save some money at the same time.
Yeah, really important stuff. I mean, I think we kind of underestimate the importance of stakeholder management interaction on our projects, especially when you have multiple stakeholders on your, like you do on your types of projects, of course. And, I always joke that the term project management is misleading because the word people isn't in it at all. Right. And I feel like, 95% of project management is interacting with people. And, we need to continue to develop our skills to do that. So strong leadership drives strong projects. Become an AEC PM professional and give your team the leadership skills they need to thrive. Customize PM development, premium content, and a leadership edge that sets you apart. Learn more at aecpm.com. Jesse, going back over to you for a minute here, corridor projects, of course, involve, multiple contracts sometimes, a lot of simultaneous work fronts, dispersed segments. What are some of the strategies that you found most effective for maintaining the schedule on your projects, right? The quality of the work, when you have all these different moving parts. I mean, it is a huge project management effort.
Yeah, definitely, Anthony. It's a great question. Really, two things come to mind regarding managing complex corridor projects. The first would be effective communication. I mentioned, communication strategies need to be tailored to a project, but they also need to be tailored to the people that you have on the project. Different agencies communicate differently, different stakeholders communicate differently. Maybe someone likes to answer a phone call, but the person you're working with on the other project or down the road is a guy who only, does emails, so that's something you need to consider. Different ways to communicate. It could be progress meetings, phone calls, in-person conversations. Really, really important on these corridor manager projects. The second thing I think is vital is the collaborative team building aspect. Really, when you're dealing with these large projects with lots of different people that you manage, you really have to deal with a lot of different personalities and needs. Different stakeholders require different things. The contractor wants something different than the client wants. The contractor is concerned about being paid. The client is concerned about getting a quality product. The engineer is concerned about, managing his staff and his budget correctly. I currently work on a corridor that requires a lot of special attention in this area, just managing those personalities, building that team throughout the course of the project. Part of that question also talked about schedule. Schedules need to be updated routinely by contractors. They need to be tracked. You need to make sure that people are meeting milestones, both internally and externally. You need to track work according to the controlling items based on schedules. Another key part about deadlines and schedules is our responsibility as part of that work. Meeting deadlines requires responsive problem solving on our end. That means we need to give quick responses to RFIs and project issues. It's really our job on the project and on the corridor to keep the project moving forward, keep everybody working together, keep everybody talking to each other, keep everybody, I call it, playing nicely, sharing their toys in the same area. So a very big part of projects like these.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, a lot to unpack there, but I will say that that last piece is a good thing. We have a lot of civil engineering professionals that listen to this podcast that are in the design. And of course, we have some of the construction side. So I think it's a good thing for them to hear some of those because, for example, the schedule piece that Jesse mentioned in terms of the timeline being very sensitive on these projects is important for you to know. Like maybe you're a design engineer and you have to support your construction engineers in the field, right? You have to understand that they're working on a different level of pressure, most likely than you are when it comes to a design schedule from time to time, right? So that's something we need to keep in mind. I also think that what Jesse talked about in terms of the different communication styles is really, really important. We do a lot of work, a lot of project management development training and different types of programs here. And it's one thing to have a list of stakeholders on your project, but you can't really, treat them all the same, right? Because they're all different people. That's something that we don't learn in engineering school, right? There's no equation for how to deal with people because you can't punch something in and hit enter and get an answer, right? Because everyone's different. So I definitely think when you approach your stakeholder management, you have to kind of get a feel for what that person's like. How do they communicate? Like Jesse was saying, maybe someone is going to be a pick up the phone type of person and someone's going to be write an email, or, someone has a different tone than someone else. Someone wants a lot more data, right, than someone else, right? Depending on the type of person. So I think that that's very important. And the thing about the schedule is critical. I mean, and again, this is a construction versus design thing, but in the construction side of things, the contractor really owns the schedule, right? And they have to be responsible for that schedule. But as an engineer or a professional overseeing construction, you need to keep an eye on that, right? And be interacting with the contractor when you see something that maybe doesn't make sense or something got changed and it hasn't been adjusted. I know we've worked with some DOTs on some PM training and they do these 2-week kind of look aheads, right? To give you an idea of what's going on. So lots of stuff that's important to think about when you're getting involved with these large projects. In Jesse and Jared's case, of course, it's a corridor, a complex corridor project, but it could be any kind of larger project where you have similar types of things there that kind of Jesse took us through. And so, Jared, let me flip back over to you here. There are a lot of different delivery methods on these projects, like construction manager at risk, design build, design bid build, and they can really dramatically change, right, how the project unfolds. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you might tailor your planning or your staging or some of your contractor coordination to kind of align with that delivery method for a project.
Yeah, Anthony, you're 100% correct. I would say that there are more delivery methods now for construction projects than there's ever been in the past. And here at Stanley, we've done a lot of them. We've done design build, we've done progressive design build, design bid build, CMAR. So there's we have some experience with all of them. We've worked for the contractor under some of these projects. We've worked for the agency under some of these projects. And so depending on where you're at, you're going to have some competing priorities. I'll put it that way. And depending on your client, you're kind of in the middle of that. You're trying to drive certain priorities while bringing a successful project to a conclusion at the end of the day. So yeah, I would say that the key, no matter what method you're trying to deliver the project, the key is to get the design construction management team on board early, and then allow us to give you the greatest benefit that we have to offer. So going through scheduling, reviewing the schedule, phasing, staging, doing value engineering, that's stuff that we can bring to the table if we're on early, as opposed to being too late to the game. And it's all kind of decided and put in place and in contractual language. And then we don't have any way to affect that. One thing that we've done on a few projects recently is we have our key people, our key team members that we brought to the table for a project, and we get together with the contractor and the agency, and we sit and we interview every inspector that we're going to have as part of that team, and either accept them as part of the team or reject them. And that's because the team dynamic on these huge corridor projects is so vital to getting things done effectively in the most effective manner that we can. So there, you might have upwards of 15, 20 inspectors on a huge corridor project, and they all have to have the same singular mindset that we're pushing ahead to try to get this thing accomplished. So they have to see what their part is in the whole scheme, and then really lean into that to make it successful. So we found by doing this group interview process and selecting the team members for an individual project and rejecting potential team members for an individual project, it's given us the best opportunity to have a great cohesive team to see it all the way through to the end.
That's great. And the one thing that I would say to kind of reinforce some of the Jared's thoughts there is, I think as a project manager, as an engineer, whether you're in design or construction, I think it's a really good idea to learn about these different delivery methods. I know there's more and more of them these days, but I think as civil engineers in general, it's good to be kind of well-rounded. And if you want to serve, your clients and the project stakeholders, I think the more intelligent you can get around these things, the better. I mean, there's plenty of case studies you can read out there online. I'm sure there's people in your companies that have some expertise that you can reach out to. But I think, a lot of the project managers that I've talked to in the civil infrastructure space, like the ones that can really run these projects, they have a good feel for these different delivery methods. And like you're saying, Jared, you got to know what buttons to push for the different scenarios. And I think that that's something that I would highly recommend to all listeners really to think about. All right, Jesse, you mentioned earlier how important it was communication on these projects. Now, we know that cross-agency coordination can really make or break any kind of project, especially a corridor project. What approaches have helped you to kind of build trust and build up, the right communication, the right rapport with these agencies or utility companies or municipalities and kind of other partners that you work with regularly throughout the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really important on these large projects. You know, the answer is kind of simplistic in my mind. It's really honoring your word with these different agencies. If you're looking to build trust with them, honor your word. Do what you say you're going to do. Communicate that with them when you say you're going to communicate. Let them know what's going on. Give them updates. Be responsive to their needs is a large part of this. I think of the corridor project I'm working on right now. We're working within a city, 2 corridor sections within a city. There was a resident who had an issue with light pollution in her backyard with the permanent lighting and the permanent lighting we were installing. So we we discussed it with the city. We talked to the agency we were working for, the DOT, and we were able to work with the resident and the city to add protective lighting shields in the backside of the luminaires, which mostly solved the issue for the resident. But it's things like that. It's active problem solving. It's working together as a team.
That's great. Yeah. And I think that, and you gave a specific example, which is great. And again, I think that reinforces the fact that there isn't necessarily a quote unquote playbook for this, right? You're going to have to handle these different situations, different stakeholders, neighbors on projects, right? Citizens that are involved. But I think the more you can get involved and interact, the better. And for those of you that aren't maybe at the level of Jesse or Jared yet, like maybe you're starting out as a project manager, I would say observe as many of these meetings and interactions as you can, right? Try to tag along on meetings, get out in the field. Because I think the more you see these interactions on a project or go to a public meeting, I know I did a lot of that. I went to public meetings just to observe how people interact. I think that's really important because, again, those are the things that you're not necessarily going to learn in a project management or a textbook type of course. And it's important to kind of see those interactions as they come. So that's something that's important. And Jared, when we think about these projects, there's always a level of risk and thinking about kind of risk management on your projects. And I know that utility conflicts are often one of the biggest sources of risks on the projects that you work on. What are some practices that have helped you to maybe, reduce delays, manage these utility relocations, and try to keep the construction moving as smoothly as possible when there is a lot of risk out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that utility relocations is the biggest cause for project delays, bar none. It's the biggest one out there. You could have in the springtime a utility that gets delayed from being relocated by a week, maybe 2 weeks, and that could cause a project that's supposed to be finished up October 31st at the end of the year to push all the way to a spring completion because they miss their paving window to get asphalt paved. So a small mistake up front can really have a detrimental effect on the back end. And that costs not just time, but that's a lot of money, added expense that's added to the agency to get that completed. So there's a few toolboxes we have, our tools in our toolbox that we have to try to get these utilities relocated quickly and effectively. The first one is to get out into the field. As soon as you are under contract, you have a set of plans, get those utilities located and get out in the field and walk the job and take a look at your plans and say, yeah, this makes sense. All the utilities shown in my plans are here, or wait a minute, here's 2 utilities painted on the ground that don't show up in my plans. We got to do some more digging to find out where they go, who owns them, and what do we need to do? They need to be relocated. What do we need to do to make sure this doesn't become an issue that delays the project? So that's step 1. Step 2 is I like to get all the utilities in a room for a meeting, a weekly coordination meeting, to discuss who's coming in first to relocate, how many people are on these utility poles that have to be moved off. There could be 5 utilities on a utility pole. What order are they coming down in? Who's going the deepest? Who's going to be the last one off? Who has to remove the poles? Make sure that's all coordinated. And what if one schedule slips? Can we move up another utility to take their spot so that we can keep things moving down the line and get them all relocated? Then you want to go out there and look while they're doing the relocations to make sure, based on the utility permit that the agency gave you, are they relocating to the proper location? Are they far enough off of the edge of pavement? Are they within the right-of-way still? Are they deep enough? Are they going to conflict at that location with some more drainage work that we have to do? So it's a continual process to walk these utilities from prior to being relocated all the way through completion, because it's such an important part. It costs so much time and money to the project if it's not done timely and correctly.
Yeah, and I would say, just from my own experience as well, dealing with these utility issues, it's like you've both been saying the whole conversation today. It's a lot about communication, right? It's a lot of times these things either happen because of lack of communication, and then you have a utility, an issue with it, or you're really good at communicating, you get ahead of it, and you're able to proactively plan it, and it goes a lot more smoothly. So I hate to keep bringing up the C word, but it seems like in project management, all the different challenges that you deal with, the more you can communicate effectively, communicate early, right? It can really help you on your projects with a lot of these risks that we're talking about.
Yeah,
And
and I just
oh,
want
go
to
ahead,
add
Jared.
on one of my most recent projects, we had the utility coordination meetings, but I found it even more useful to reach out to the PMs for the utilities on the side, give them a call on their cell phone and say, all right, what's happening this week? What happened last week? This is what was said in the meeting. Are we holding true to that? Are we slipping? If so, why? Is there someone who needs to make a decision over you that's not making a decision to keep things moving ahead? So just kind of a one-on-one talk with these utility companies away from the pressures of an organized meeting. I think that's really helpful as well.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think anything that you have in your risk register in terms of risks you're considering on your project, like utilities, if you can do extra communication around them, like Jared's suggesting here, do it because those are your pitfalls, right in front of you if you're doing some good risk management. And I guess Jesse, staying on the topic of risk for a minute, I mean, I think one of the bigger risks in all civil infrastructure projects is permitting in terms of the schedule, right? Permitting can take a long time. Permitting can cause delays. And I'm just curious in, what you can offer up in terms of permitting and, how you can kind of get ahead of it or the best you can do to try to minimize. I'm not going to say avoid, I'm going to say minimize delays or risks related to permitting processes.
Yeah, well, in a best case scenario project, when we would come to a project, most of the permitting would be taken care of in phase one and phase two design. So the best case scenario is when we arrive, much of the permitting is done, and we're just honoring and making sure that the project is following the permitting requirements. So, and obviously, you have permitting for utility relocations that we've been discussing. Risk management engineering is really, whether it's permitting or safety or resilience considerations, you're trying to see beyond the immediate needs of a project and analyze and adjust for these risks and any uncertainties that may come up. The reason we're on a project is because there is going to be uncertainties. There is going to be something that comes up that nobody anticipated. That's where a good project manager steps in on a corridor project and acts. Proper planning is a big part of risk management. We come up. You mentioned risk register earlier. We come up with that at the start of a project. We identify potential issues. We identify risks that may come up. A big part of a project, one risk that I think of is safety related concerns. We want to make sure that my team is coming home safely, the contractor is performing the work safely, but also the roadway users are able to use the road and the construction and the staging all safely in a safe manner. So we have to take those risks, identify them, analyze the risk, develop, a response strategy to what that is, and basically monitor that risk and see how are you doing. You got to look back to look forward kind of activity, basically, so you're not repeating any mistakes that you may have found. So safety is very important. Like I mentioned, one thing we do in our department meetings, we have a construction related safety topic where we discuss a risk. We discuss a potential hazard like equipment or open hole. You've identified that risk. Now what do you do? How do you act around that risk? You analyze that and make sure that you have a plan for that and a safe way to work in that environment.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, safety is critical on these projects, and it's great. That's a great tip in terms of keeping that at the forefront of everybody's mind. I know we have a lot of clients that'll do like a safety minute at the beginning of their meetings, similar to that, which is really helpful. So that's a big plus, and I hope all of you out there listening can try to incorporate that if you're not doing that. Jared, we've got a lot of digital tools out there today: BIM, GIS, 3D modeling that are kind of transforming the way we build projects. How have these technologies kind of affected or improved your ability to manage and deliver these corridor projects?
Yeah, absolutely. The technology out there is pretty awesome, and it's pretty neat to learn it and try to incorporate it into your everyday work, especially on these big corridor projects where there's a massive amount of work going on. Anything you can do to simplify and compress an item of work that needs to get done is valuable both in time and money, which is what are the drivers of these big corridor projects. So Trimble Site Vision is a cool one that we've started using, where it takes a 3D model and you can take a tablet or phone out into the field and it's all GPS located, and you can turn on the camera function and look through it and it'll overlay the 3D model onto your screen. So you can see above ground where a abutment's going to be, where a noise wall is going to be. You can look below ground and see proposed storm sewers and crossings. Ideally, at the end of the day, we're going to get to a point where we can accurately have the location of all existing utilities. And then you can see real life conflicts that are there. If you're going to, let's say we have to lengthen a run of guardrail. Okay, what's that mean? Is there a gas line that's under the ground there? Is there a structure that now has to be rotated a different way with an offset flat top to make sure that posts aren't driven through the top of it? So it's a great tool. We're scratching the surface with it now. I think as we get more detailed information of underground utilities in the future, it's going to be pretty awesome. And another one we're using is GPS mapping with Propeller. We're flying jobs with that, creating 3D models of the ground, highly accurate models, using it for measurements areas right now, but it can do highly accurate volume measurements as well. Out in Utah, we have a large program where we're doing deck patching for a bundled set of bridges, and we fly it, and you can measure every patch using this program with high accuracy. So there's a lot of things that save time and money with these advancements in technology, and it's only going to continue to snowball from here. So I'm excited about what the future has.
Yeah, that's great. And the one thing I'll say for those of you out there listening is I know it could be a little overwhelming, all the different technology and the tools out there. I think a good place to start is always to check in with your IT department or other project managers in your organization to see if they're already using something successfully. They might have some tutorials, or they might be able to teach you how to use it as opposed to just venturing out there and trying to find something, because it is a little bit of a wild, wild west in terms of there's a lot of tools, but there's also some highly recognized tools, like Jared mentioned, a couple of ones that are really popular. So I think just, try to get some insights from others that you work with to get you on the right path in terms of finding these tools that can be really effective for you. All right, I got one more question for Jesse on the corridor projects, then we'll wrap up with a final career kind of project management related question. So, Jesse, we know that surrounding communities are heavily affected by corridor work. What approaches have helped you manage that outreach, right? Communicate disruptions, maintain that public trust during construction, which is so important to the success of the project.
Yes, very important to the success of a project. Oftentimes, it's not the primary concern of the team, but I think it should be. In a lot of ways, one of the primary concerns. Personally, I really try to treat everyone with dignity and respect. You're going to have angry people on a project. Oftentimes, you remember projects not on the work that was performed, but the people that you interacted with on that project. You remember the project details get fuzzy, but you remember that person and what their concern was. You handle every concern with responsiveness. You do what you can for others, but you have to tailor your approach. We have done a lot of different ways, a lot of different outreach efforts. We've built project websites. Some clients prefer, a public informational meeting where you meet with different residents or different stakeholders. We've distributed pamphlets door to door before. Sometimes the best way I found is just knocking on a door, smiling at someone and, handing them a business card and say, hey, I'm managing this project. If you have any concerns, give me a call. And, oftentimes that provides a lot of goodwill, and you have a better outcome than them just calling and complaining. So another item that needs to be discussed, social media and email blast updates. A lot of clients already have systems in place. Sometimes we provide those updates. Sometimes we review them, and then they get blasted out to the constituents that are affected. Those are all very effective tools for communication, but really it just depends. You use what tools are best in this scenario and for that corridor project, and you move forward.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think generally speaking, like you said, being respectful first and foremost to people is obviously really important. And I think people want to be communicated to. They want to be up to date on things. And I think if you can find a way to communicate clearly and regularly and consistently to people, that's going to go a long way from my experience in dealing with neighbors, adjacent, property owners, or whatever the case may be. And again, it's another one of those things that there isn't a class in college called how to communicate with property owners for civil engineers, but it's one of those things that you kind of got to talk again to your colleagues, to your manager. You got to observe people doing it. But again, I think Jesse gives just a good general, life advice in terms of being respectful to people. I think it's just a good thing to do every day. And that's a good thing to do when you're dealing with people around your projects, because you have to understand they're being disrupted by this project potentially, right? Their lives are being disrupted. And so, yes, you want to get your project done. We get that, but this is also their life that's in the balance a little bit here, depending on the situation. So I think being respectful of that is very important. All right. So the last question I have for you guys is, I'm going to relate it to project management, since we've talked a lot about managing these larger corridor projects today. And what I'll just ask each of you, and Jared, maybe you go first on this one, just based on your experience managing projects and working with other project managers in our industry, what would you say is one of the one or two skill sets that you think you really need to develop to be a successful project manager?
Yeah, I would say that first off, you need to maintain some level of flexibility. Things are going to change as soon as you start building a job. Eisenhower has a quote that I love. It says, he said, "A plan means nothing. Planning means everything." So no offense to design engineers. They sometimes give us a plan if it's a design, bid, build job. And that's a perfect plan in an ideal world. But if we just, said, go out and build it, it's not going to get built perfectly like that. So you have to always be planning for any type of unknowns that inevitably occur in the field. But at the same time, there's certain constraints that you have to be rock solid on. I would guess if I was trying to think about the big projects that I've worked on, I would say it's probably 80-20. 80%, you need to be collaborative and flexible and work to get the job done in the best way possible. And on 20%, you have to be rock solid, because these constraints cannot be moved and we cannot relent on them. And if you communicate these things from the very beginning of the job, everybody can work together to achieve them. We're just trying to build the best possible project in the real world with all the real world constraints that are out there.
Awesome. Jesse, how about you? What's your take on from your experience?
I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned is multitasking. There's a lot of things going on very fast. Construction could be very fast paced. Jared mentioned flexibility, but you also need to be able to handle a lot of different information all at the same time. There'll be days where you literally stack phone calls three deep. If there's a project issue, you might have two different people calling you on that while you're working at it, from your vehicle, trying to offer a solution to that challenge. So flexibility, multitasking, collaborative has been discussed, in detail. You just need to have the technical ability too. Even if you're the world's best communicator, if you've never done something before, that's going to be a problem for the project. You need to reach out then and ask questions, and you need to find those knowledge bases. When I have a very difficult structural engineering question, I don't wing it. I call my people. I have a phone call away, and I'm able to talk to, our department manager for structures and be like, hey, what would you do in this scenario? What do you think the best practice is? So you need to be able to ask for help when you don't know something as well.
All right. Well, guys, great talking with both of you today. Once again, Jared Hamilton, Jesse Singer from Stanley Consultants, talking about managing corridor projects, but really just managing large projects, which have a lot of similarities to their projects. Guys, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Yep. Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jared and Jesse. Lots of good stuff for civil engineers who want to manage large projects. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this regularly to help engineering professionals become better project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.